I would say if you want to get to know more, there's a fantastic documentary by a filmmaker called Ken Farrow called Injustice. It's on Vimeo. You can watch it. It looks at 9 particular cases of state murder of black folks in this country where juries have returned a verdict of unlawful killing, yet the state has still refused to prosecute. There's been many more since. The film was made in the early 2000s or late 90s. There's been many more since, but I wouldn't be fooled by the fact that police in the UK don't have guns. They still do a very good job of killing people when they get into their custody. That said, I don't think we should say the problem is exactly the same or the same extremity. But in terms of mass incarceration, numbers are very similar in terms of the disproportionate amount that black folk make in prisons here. So even if the manifestation is particular, which it certainly is, even if the fact that there's a welfare state in Britain means poverty is not as extreme in America as it is in America, and there's various differences, systematically there are very similar issues. What I will say though, 2 things, and I'll come to your question as well, sis. I've heard a lot of statements about intersectionality, but I think there's one gaping hole we've missed in all the conversations around that issue. If we're not connecting violence against black and brown bodies inside the Western world itself with the violence that the states of the West do to black and brown bodies globally, including with Obama in the White House, who seems to think it's perfectly acceptable to bomb countries in Africa. For those who don't know, Libya was bombed by NATO, sanctioned by Mr. Obama, and the groups that were supported by NATO in Libya explicitly murdered an entire town full of black people, a place called Tawerga in Libya. This is stuff you can look up, it's on the internet, it's very well researched. So I think if we're not connecting the violence that the American and British states do externally with the violence they do to us internally, are we lending credence to the idea that because of our proximity to whiteness, that our black lives are worth more than black lives that are not in closer proximity to whiteness? So I think we have to make that connection. In terms of the States, it's funny, it's weird, because I went to New York in the summer, I went to Afropunk Festival. You're all probably very jealous, it was incredible. Most of you probably don't know, it's 2 brothers from Hackney who started that festival. I met them, it's 2 London brothers, 2 East London black youths from Hackney who started Afropunk Festival. They're probably going to get annoyed with me because they don't want the whole world to know that, because in the States probably everyone thinks it's an American festival, and over here people would be hating on them because like, how are you going to go to America and start a big old festival? You know, people hating it, and they're from the hood as well, so it's all of that, right? But I was surprised, to be honest with you, what social media has done. Walking through New York, it was like being in London. Like, people was like, right, that's Akala. And I was shocked, because obviously it was after the Frankie Boyle thing and the Guardian video and then some of the music I'd done. But I was surprised the degree to which, obviously, Afropunk is a particular type of black space. Obviously there's non-black people there, but it's a majority black festival. For those who don't know, it was Lenny Kravitz, Grace Jones, Lauryn Hill, Gary Clark Jr. I'm not trying to make you jealous. That I went to watch. But obviously that's a particular type of black people who would attend that kind of event. So obviously in that niche, I was surprised the degree to which myself, Loki, others are crossing the Atlantic. But obviously major record labels are not going to start promoting that cross-cultural dialogue around these forms of injustice. That's not in their interest. So we have to tore off our own backs and keep our independence. Yeah, well, I mean, if you fancy the odds, there is always a very good response for someone racially abusing you or calling you a nigger, and that's a punch in the face. I mean, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. If it's 10 on 1, maybe you might walk away, but if you feel pain, there's nothing wrong with responding adequately to that. There's a lot of sisters these days are doing MMA, you know? And everyone knows Ronda Rousey would take Floyd any day of the week. In fact, my Muay Thai coach is a woman, and she beats me up regularly. I would recommend the sisters take up some form of self-defense. I think anyone in any kind of remotely revolutionary movement should be practicing some form of self-defense, because it can get like that. But B, I mean, with the word nigger, and I will just say nigger because when we say N-word, that's what you're thinking anyway, right? I mean, people act as if white people only started calling black people niggers once hip-hop got popular. It's very strange, and I agree that rappers are held to complete double standards, of course, and even as someone who's critical of certain strains within hip-hop, I'm still defensive in the sense that when the narrative around critiquing hip-hop comes up, no one asks who owns hip-hop, who puts hip-hop on the radio. As Mos Def said, old white men is running this rap shit. Some tall Israeli is running this rap shit, and his label took the song, for those who don't know, Mos Def made a song called The Rape's Over, on the same beat that Jay-Z used for The Takeover, and they took it off his album without telling him his label, and then of course he couldn't get back into the US and all kinds of other stuff. So there's certain type of performed blackness, as Baldwin talks about, you know, a niggerized blackness that white society loves to consume and then pathologize at the same time, but it's for you. It's your version and your vision of blackness. So I think that On the other hand, though, I think black America is in a particularly unique space in the sense that if you are a successful black American artist, you wouldn't even be able to shit in white people's toilets if it wasn't for mass movements of black people. Yeah. So you kind of do owe your community in a very black and white way that isn't really applicable to many other places in the world.
It's true.
What do you do? Then you're going to live psychically with the scars of not responding. I'm saying my mum's 4'10" and her dad's about as racist as a human being could possibly be. And she spent her life rebelling against him and was punished very brutally for it often. Abuse of, and I'm not saying that means you should suffer abuse, I'm just saying the abuse of people by bullies is not new. And unfortunately with bullies, and this applies to globally what we're talking about, bullies only learn when they get their ass whipped. And if we look globally at the system of European hegemony, and America is its offshoot, and we look at how our government's kissing China's ass at the moment, now China's in the country, we can learn a thing or two about what happens. Power only respects power. And I would close on this, that I think for all the social movements we have against white supremacy, against European colonialism, against patriarchy and all these other forms, we're talking about black lives specifically, there will always be racism as long as there are not black societies capable of militarily, politically and economically defending the black population. And if we look historically at how white supremacy came to evolve, when the Portuguese and other Europeans first came to Africa, they were not racist, because they found black societies militarily, economically and politically capable of defending themselves. The early parts of trade between Europeans and Africans were ivory, pepper, other forms of commodity, of which human beings were only a small part. If we look at the Greeks in ancient Egypt, they did not consider themselves superior to Africans because Africans were their teachers. If we look at the Spanish interaction with the Moors, they did not consider themselves superior to Moors because the people they were interacting with were not at a lower economic, political and economic state. So unfortunately, I think we can only at best put a plaster over the wound of what is a bigger global conflict, and understanding the way in which the ideas or the ideology of white supremacy evolved in that catastrophic interaction between African and European civilization, I think will give us a better strategy in the long term of how we can develop or be part of a movement towards reducing the deficit between the West's ability to do violence to the rest of the world and not. The kind of abuses that used to happen to Chinese people in America when they couldn't vote, which did happen, when they were being lynched, which did happen, when they were used to build railroads, which did happen, are not going to happen today. Why? I've been to Chinatown and seen people cause trouble in London, and the police come and bust your head, not the Chinese people's head who are beating the guy up on the floor, drag the guy out and be like, what are you causing trouble for? There will not be an Africa town in London anytime soon, because we don't command that level of respect. I'm not saying everything China does is perfect, by the way. What I'm saying is it's unfortunate humans seem incapable, at least at the highest levels of power, of respecting anything but equal capacity to do violence. Let's just look on who's on the UN Security Council. So we can plead and we can march and we can organize, but I think also we've got to be honest with ourselves. If we look at how countries in Africa got their independence, most of them got it by the gun. If we look at how transatlantic slavery ended, Haitian Revolution, Sam Sharp in Jamaica, and I'm not advocating violence, what I am saying is, I don't consider resistance violence, by the way. I'm not saying we need to be out in the streets burning stuff, but what I am saying is we have to situate ourselves within a realistic sense of this conflict. And I think fooling ourselves into believing we can embarrass the state into being nice. They're not even nice to working class white people. Incidentally, I will close on this point. You were mentioning about free school meals. Our government has just announced here they're going to take free school meals out of the schools in the UK. Wow. And that ain't just black kids who's going to be affected by that. As someone who grew up on free school meals, I'm a bit offended by that. So the violence that is happening, as what Baldwin says, as the world struggles to continue to be white, there is going to be more violence. How do people reconcile the idea that you're superior with, oh, my government is bowing to China when they come to England? How are you going to reconcile you're taught you're superior, but India has just sent a rocket to Mars for 10% of the cost that NASA did it, while it's still a third world country? The world is no longer white. But it seems we haven't realized that, and we haven't organized ourselves accordingly. And certainly our states are going to do the best to hide that from us. So I think we have to take a historical view also.